grieving son, powerful business empire, a deadly conspiracy. When Victor Harrington was declared dead, everyone believed it was a tragic accident. But behind the scenes, his own stepson and a web of high-ranking officials had orchestrated the perfect crime. Their plan worked until a few weeks later, when the impossible happened. Victor Harrington came back alive. Daniel Whitmore had always lived in the shadow of his stepfather, Victor Harrington. Despite the wealth and status that came with being a part of the Harrington dynasty, Daniel never felt like he truly belonged. Victor, a formidable businessman with an empire spanning multiple industries, made his disdain for Daniel painfully obvious. He saw Daniel as nothing more than an entitled child, a weak link in the Harrington legacy. Daniel was tolerated but never truly accepted. In the halls of power, where decisions were made and fortunes were secured, Victor ensured that Daniel remained nothing more than a spectator. One particular memory burned in Daniel's mind like an unhealed wound. At a critical board meeting, Daniel had finally mustered the courage to present his own business proposal. His hands had trembled slightly as he laid out his vision for expanding the company's tech division, a meticulously crafted plan he had worked on for months. But before he could even finish, Victor had leaned back in his chair, smirking. He let out a chuckle, the kind that cut deep. "This?" Victor scoffed, flipping through Daniel's proposal without genuine interest. "A child's fantasy, unfit for the real world." The room had erupted into nervous laughter, the other executives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. No one dared to challenge Victor, and in that moment, Daniel felt the weight of their silent judgment. His face burned with humiliation as Victor dismissed his hard work as if it were nothing more than a school project. That night, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the city skyline, his jaw clenched, his fingers curling into fists. It wasn't just that Victor doubted him, it was that he delighted in his failures. The empire Daniel had dreamed of inheriting was slipping further and further from his grasp, all because Victor refused to see him as anything more than an imposter in his own family. Evelyn Harrington, Daniel's mother and Victor's once devoted wife, watched this growing resentment with quiet understanding. She too had suffered under Victor's rule. Their marriage had started with passion and promise, but over the years, Victor had changed. His love had been replaced by cold indifference, his promises broken and discarded like outdated business contracts. Evelyn had once been the queen of high society, but now she was little more than a forgotten ornament in Victor's world of power and ambition. She saw the bitterness in her son's eyes, the silent rage that simmered beneath his carefully controlled exterior, and she recognized it because it mirrored her own. "You deserve more, Daniel," she had whispered one evening over a glass of wine, her voice laced with a venom that had long been suppressed. "Victor will never hand you the empire. Not willingly." Daniel met his mother's gaze, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Victor Harrington had made a mistake. He had underestimated the two people who knew him best, and soon he would pay the price. The decision for a conspiracy was born, but this was not made in a single moment. It crept into their minds, whispered in their ears over countless nights of quiet resentment and long silences. The more they thought about it, the more it made sense. Victor Harrington had ruled for too long, treating them as pawns in his grand game of power. If they wanted to take the empire, they would have to do it by force. Evelyn was the first to voice the unthinkable. They sat in the dim glow of Daniel's penthouse, the city lights flickering outside like distant stars. A half-empty bottle of scotch rested between them, the air thick with tension. "Victor won't step down," she murmured, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. "Not for me, not for you. He would rather die than see you in his chair." Daniel looked up, his expression unreadable. Then perhaps he should. The words hung between them, heavy and irreversible. Evelyn's lips curled into the faintest smile. She had been waiting for Daniel to say it, to take the first step into the darkness. "It has to be clean," she said after a moment. "No suspicions, no loose ends. If we do this, it must be flawless." Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of their conspiracy settling onto his shoulders. He knew he couldn't do this alone. If they were going to eliminate Victor and take control of the Harrington empire, they would need help. People on the inside, individuals with both the power and motivation to see Victor fall. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn and Daniel carefully selected their allies. First was Malcolm Reed, Victor's longtime CFO. Malcolm had spent decades ensuring the company's financial success, only to be constantly sidelined and dismissed by Victor in favor of younger, more ambitious executives. He despised Victor's arrogance, and when Daniel subtly hinted at a change in leadership, Malcolm had listened. Then there was Richard Hale, the company's head of security. Ruthless, calculating, and fiercely loyal to the highest bidder, Richard was the perfect man to oversee the finer details of their plan. He had connections, people who could make things happen and make them disappear just as easily. Lastly, there was Sophia Langley, Victor's personal assistant. She was smart, resourceful, and knew every detail of Victor's schedule. Sophia had been mistreated by Victor for years, overworked, underappreciated, and discarded the moment she made the smallest mistake. Evelyn knew Sophia would be eager to see Victor out of the picture. With their team assembled, the planning began. Every detail was scrutinized, every contingency considered. The key was making Victor's death look like an accident, something tragic yet completely untraceable. "We'll do it on one of his business trips," Richard suggested one evening, his fingers tapping against the edge of his glass. "Something unpredictable, an accident no one would question." Daniel nodded, his mind racing. "His next trip is next month. He's visiting the construction site of our new development. Remote area, dangerous terrain." Evelyn smirked. "Perfect." They spent weeks refining the details. The plan was simple. Victor's car would be tampered with just enough to ensure a catastrophic failure at the worst possible moment. A malfunction in the brakes, a slight adjustment to the steering, a death that would seem inevitable given the treacherous roads he traveled. The final piece of the puzzle was patience. They had to wait for the right moment, the perfect timing. One misstep and everything would crumble. As Daniel lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he felt no fear, no regret, only anticipation. Victor had ruled long enough. Now it was time for a new heir to rise. The day had finally arrived. Victor's business trip to the remote construction site was scheduled, and every detail had been set into motion. Richard had arranged for one of his most trusted men to handle the vehicle tampering. The brakes were modified just enough to ensure failure at high speeds, and the steering was subtly adjusted to lock under the right conditions. Malcolm, using his influence, had made sure Victor's usual driver was replaced with someone less experienced, someone who wouldn't question the minor changes in the car's handling. Sophia played her role flawlessly. She ensured that Victor's schedule remained unchanged, that there were no last-minute alterations that could disrupt the plan. When Victor left that morning, stepping into the sleek black sedan, there was no indication that he suspected anything. He was confident, arrogant as always, oblivious to the trap that had been carefully laid out for him. Hours later, the call came in. The car had veered off the road, crashing into a ravine. The wreckage was barely recognizable. Victor Harrington was declared dead at the scene, or so they thought. The days following Victor Harrington's reported death were a whirlwind of media coverage, corporate maneuvering, and hushed conversations behind closed doors. The city's business elite gathered in hushed murmurs, speaking of the titan who had met such an unfortunate end. The Harrington Corporation, though shaken, moved swiftly to reestablish its command, ensuring that the empire would not crumble under the weight of uncertainty. Daniel, now the heir apparent, stepped into his newfound role with calculated composure. Publicly, he grieved, He wore the mask of a bereaved son, delivering a eulogy at Victor's memorial that was both poignant and reverent. His words painted the picture of a man who had shaped his life, a mentor he had aspired to emulate. But beneath the carefully measured grief lay something else: triumph. The transition of power was swift. The board members, many of whom had once dismissed Daniel, now looked to him with deference. With Malcolm Reed's influence, Daniel's appointment as chairman of the board was all but assured. A formal announcement was scheduled, a grand ceremony that would mark the beginning of a new era. Evelyn watched with satisfaction as her son ascended to the throne they had so carefully orchestrated. The pieces had fallen into place, and their plan had worked seamlessly, or so they believed. Then the first sign of trouble emerged. 3 days before the inauguration, Malcolm received an anonymous email. The subject line was simple: "He is watching." Attached was a single image, grainy, as if taken from a great distance, but unmistakable. Victor Harrington. The photo showed him standing in a shadowed alley, dressed in an uncharacteristically rugged manner, his face partially obscured by the brim of a cap. It was impossible. Victor was dead. They had seen the wreckage. They had orchestrated it themselves. Malcolm immediately forwarded the email to Daniel and Evelyn, his message urgent. "We need to talk. Now." Daniel's grip tightened around his phone as he read the message. His mind raced with possibilities. Had someone staged this? Was it some sick joke from a rival? Or was there something far more sinister at play? That evening, the conspirators gathered once more in Daniel's penthouse, their celebratory atmosphere now replaced by unease. The email was projected onto a screen, and the image of Victor loomed over them like a ghost refusing to be forgotten. "It has to be fake," Sophia whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "A trick," Richard added, but even he looked unconvinced. "Maybe someone trying to shake us. A corporate enemy. Someone who suspects something." Evelyn's gaze was locked on the image, her expression unreadable. No one outside this room knew the truth. No one. So if someone is playing games, it's because they do know. And that should terrify all of us. The silence in the room was suffocating. Daniel leaned forward, his jaw clenched. "Then we find out who sent this," he said firmly. "And we eliminate them." No one argued. For the first time since the plan had been set into motion, the perfect crime no longer felt so perfect. The walls of Daniel's penthouse seemed to close in as the conspirators sat in tense silence, their eyes fixated on the haunting image of Victor Harrington. The man they had killed or thought they had killed was out there, watching. Daniel's mind raced. Fear gnawed at the edges of his resolve, but he forced himself to remain calm. He could not afford to waver, not now. Whoever had sent the email had to be found. And if Victor was truly alive, then they had unfinished business. "We need to verify this," Richard said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, measured, but there was an edge to it. "I have contacts who can track the metadata of this email. We'll see where it came from." "Do it," Daniel ordered. His tone was sharp, decisive, masking the turmoil within. Malcolm rubbed his temples, his usual composure beginning to crack. If Victor survived, how? We planned everything down to the smallest detail. The car was beyond recognition. There was no way anyone could have walked away from that. Sophia, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Unless the body was never his to begin with." The room grew colder. The thought sent a chill through each of them. Had Victor anticipated the attack? Had he outmaneuvered them before they even struck? Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping against the armrest. "If Victor is alive, he won't stay in the shadows forever. He's biding his time, gathering information, waiting for the right moment." She paused, then looked directly at her son. "We need to find him before he finds us." Daniel nodded, determination replacing the initial shock. We have the resources. We use them. Richard, I want every security feed from that night reviewed. Malcolm, check all financial transactions. If he's alive, he's going to need money to move. And Sophia. Sophia met his gaze, her lips pressing together. What do you need me to do? You were closest to him. You know his patterns. If he's alive, where would he go? Sophia hesitated, then sighed. Victor wasn't a man who ran from his problems. If he's alive, he's already back in the city. And he's watching us. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. That was fast, he muttered, opening the message. His eyes scanned the text, and suddenly, his entire demeanor shifted. The email's location was masked, rerouted through multiple servers, but there was one brief signal before it went dark. Where? Daniel demanded. Richard looked up, his expression grim. Not far from the Harrington estate. Evelyn inhaled sharply. The estate? He's toying with us. Daniel clenched his fists. Then it's time we stop playing games. His heart pounded in his chest. Victor Harrington had survived their attempt to erase him. But Daniel had no intention of letting him reclaim what should now be his. The hunt had begun. Daniel barely slept that night. His mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The thought of Victor out there, lurking in the dark, sent a cold shiver through him. The man had built an empire on his ruthless cunning. If he had survived, there was no telling what he had planned. By morning, Daniel had assembled the conspirators once more in his penthouse. A palpable tension hung in the air, their nerves fraying with each passing moment of uncertainty. Richard, always methodical, arrived first. He set up his laptop, fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. I spent all night running traces on the email, he announced, his voice tight with frustration. The sender covered their tracks well. Whoever sent this knew exactly what they were doing. Evelyn, poised but clearly shaken, sipped from a glass of red wine, despite the early hour. Then we assume the worst, she murmured. Victor isn't just alive. He's planning something. Malcolm nodded, his fingers drumming anxiously on the polished table. He won't go to the police. He's too proud for that. But he will make a move. The question is when. Sophia sat silently, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. She had known Victor better than most, and something about this situation didn't sit right with her. If he wanted revenge, she mused, why reveal himself now? He could have exposed us already. Daniel exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. Then we force his hand. He turned to Richard. Pull up the security footage from the estate. I want to know if he's really been there. Richard nodded and, within minutes, had hacked into the Harrington estate's private surveillance system. Grainy black and white footage flickered onto the screen. The timestamp showed footage from the previous night, just hours after the mysterious email was sent. The group watched in silence as the camera scanned the vast estate grounds. The front gates remained locked. The perimeter security showed no breaches. And then they saw it. A figure stood at the far edge of the property, just beyond the iron fence. The image was blurry, distorted by the low light, but there was no mistaking it. A man, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by the shadows. He lingered there for nearly an hour, unmoving, as if watching, waiting. Then, without warning, he turned and vanished into the night. Evelyn's breath hitched. It's him. Sophia shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Or it's someone he sent. Daniel's jaw tightened. Enough of this waiting. If he wants to play games, fine. We'll set the board. His eyes darkened as he looked at each of them. I want every resource used to find him. No more mistakes. No more loose ends. The others nodded, but a quiet unease settled over them. They had spent weeks believing they had buried their greatest threat. Now that threat was hunting them, And if Victor Harrington had truly returned from the dead, one thing was certain: he wasn't coming back to forgive. The days that followed were a whirlwind of silent panic and aggressive pursuit. Daniel deployed every resource at his disposal: private investigators, digital forensics teams, and informants scoured the city for any sign of Victor Harrington. Every alley, every financial transaction, every possible hideout was examined under a microscope. Yet, nothing. The silence was maddening. "He's toying with us," Malcolm muttered, pacing in Daniel's penthouse. "No man just disappears like this. Not unless he wants to." Evelyn sat with perfect posture on the velvet settee, her fingers tapping impatiently against her knee. Victor was always careful. If he survived, he won't be reckless now. Richard, sitting at his laptop, let out an exhausted sigh. "We have no digital footprint, no credit card usage, no property rentals. It's like he's a ghost." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Then we force him out of hiding." He turned to Sophia, whose eyes flickered with unease. She had known Victor in ways the others hadn't. She knew his habits, his preferences, his weaknesses. "You said he wouldn't go to the police," Daniel said, his voice measured. "Then where would he go?" Sophia hesitated. "He would be careful, yes, but Victor wasn't a man to work alone. He always had a network, trusted allies." Malcolm scoffed. "And yet, none of them have come forward. He hasn't reached out to anyone. Not his legal team, not the board, no one." Sophia frowned. "That we know of." A heavy silence fell over them. Then Richard's laptop pinged. He spun the screen around, his eyes widening. "We might have something." The group leaned in. A security camera at a high-end private club in the city had flagged an unusual match. The image quality wasn't perfect, but it showed a man, cloaked in shadows, seated alone in the farthest corner of the lounge. He wore a hat pulled low over his face, but something about his posture, the tilt of his chin, was unmistakable. "Victor." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Where was this taken?" "Last night," Richard answered. "He was at Blackwood Club. He didn't pay with a card. No official record of his entry, but the AI system flagged his profile against old security footage." Daniel's grip on the table tightened. "He's close." Sophia's expression darkened. "He's watching us." Malcolm straightened. "Then let's return the favor." Daniel didn't hesitate. "We send people there. Tonight. If he shows up again, we take care of it." Richard frowned. "We can't just kill him in a public place." Daniel's gaze was cold. "We don't have to. We just need to get to him before he gets to us." Evelyn, ever the strategist, folded her hands in her lap. "If Victor is at Blackwood Club, he must feel safe there, which means he's likely meeting someone." A new fear crept into Daniel's mind. Was Victor alone in his revenge, or had he begun building an army? Night descended on the city like a heavy shroud, wrapping the streets in an eerie quiet. Daniel stood by the window of his penthouse, watching the skyline, his fingers drumming rhythmically against his glass of whiskey. Tonight they would strike. Tonight they would take control of the game once more. Blackwood Club was no ordinary establishment. It was where the city's most powerful figures gathered in secrecy, where alliances were forged and betrayals orchestrated under the dim glow of antique chandeliers. Years ago, a notorious CEO had vanished after a late-night meeting in one of the private lounges. His disappearance still whispered about among the elite. If Victor had been there, it wasn't by accident. He had a purpose, plan. It was a haven for the city's elite, a place where deals were made in whispers over glasses of expensive scotch. If Victor had been there, it wasn't by accident. He had a purpose, plan. Daniel intended to find out what it was. "Are the men in place?" he asked without turning around. Malcolm, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, nodded. "Yes, 2 inside, 3 outside. If Victor shows up again, he won't leave unnoticed. Evelyn, dressed in an elegant black gown, sat on the leather sofa, swirling a glass of wine. She had barely spoken since the meeting that afternoon, but when she did, her voice was calm, calculated. We must be discreet. If he realizes we're onto him, he'll disappear again. Daniel exhaled slowly. He wasn't interested in subtlety. Not anymore. The plan was simple. Sophia and Malcolm would go inside, blending with the guests. Richard would monitor security feeds remotely, searching for any sign of Victor. If he appeared, they would corner him, cut off his escape, and finally get the answers they needed. Sophia, already dressed for the occasion, tightened the strap of her silver heels. And what if he's expecting us? Daniel met her gaze. Then we give him what he's looking for. Blackwood Club was alive with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. A grand chandelier bathed the room in a golden glow, casting long shadows against the polished marble floors. Sophia and Malcolm entered separately, each taking their position. Richard's voice crackled in Sophia's earpiece. Security cameras are up. No sign of him yet. Sophia moved to the bar, ordering a glass of wine while surveying the room. Malcolm took a seat at a corner table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. Sophia was beginning to think they had been led into a dead end when Richard's voice came through again. Sharper this time. Wait, I've got something. She stiffened. Where? Far left corner. Near the exit. A man just walked in. Black suit, gray tie. He's keeping his head down, but the facial recognition scan just gave me an 87% match. Sophia turned slightly, careful not to be obvious. Her breath hitched as her pulse quickened, a cold sweat forming at the back of her neck. Every muscle in her body tensed, torn between the urge to look away and the desperate need to confirm what she was seeing. Was it really him? Or just another illusion, another ghost conjured by their paranoia? And then she saw him. Victor. Her breath caught in her throat. He looked different, leaner, more hardened, but there was no mistaking those piercing eyes. He wasn't hiding. He was watching. And then, as if sensing her gaze, he turned. For a moment, they locked eyes. A smirk tugged at the corner of Victor's lips. Not one of fear, nor anger, but amusement. Sophia's stomach twisted. He knew. And before she could react, before she could signal the others, Victor moved. In a fluid motion, he turned on his heel and strode toward the exit, blending seamlessly into the shifting crowd. Sophia's heart pounded as she pushed forward, but a well-dressed couple stepped into her path, laughing, unaware of her urgency. By the time she broke free, he was gone. Malcolm was already on his feet, scanning the room. Where the hell did he go? He hissed. Richard's frantic voice crackled in her earpiece. I lost him. 1 second he was there, the next he must have known we were watching. He's playing us. Sophia clenched her fists. Victor had seen them coming, and worse, he had let them know it. The Blackwood Club incident had left them shaken. Victor was alive, and he had made sure they knew it. But the question still lingered, was he acting alone? Or was there a bigger game at play? Daniel stood at the massive window of his penthouse, staring at the city below. The weight of the past weeks pressed down on him like a vice. He had built his empire through calculated moves, eliminating obstacles without hesitation. But Victor was no ordinary obstacle. He was a ghost, a shadow moving just beyond reach. Richard's voice cut through the tense silence. We finally have a lead. Everyone turned. Richard tapped furiously at his laptop, pulling up a screen filled with numbers and locations. I traced an offshore account, one that suddenly reactivated last month. The withdrawals were small at first, but yesterday, someone wired $2 million to an unknown recipient. Daniel's pulse quickened. Location. Richard smirked. That's the best part. The transaction was logged just outside the city. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. He's here. Sophia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, exhaled slowly. It's not just about revenge, she murmured. Victor isn't coming for us to settle a score. He's coming to take back what he lost. Malcolm's fists clenched. Then we end this. No more hiding. Daniel nodded, his voice cold. Get everyone in position. If Victor wants his empire back, we'll give him a warm welcome. The abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts was the perfect place for an ambush. Dark, empty, a fitting battleground for the war Victor had waged. Daniel arrived first, his footsteps echoing in the vast, hollow space. His team was positioned, armed, ready. If Victor showed up, there would be no escape this time. Minutes passed, then an hour, then the creak of a distant door. A figure emerged from the shadows, dressed in black, his presence commanding. Victor Harrington. He looked different, hardened, leaner, his face carved with a cold determination. But his eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes hadn't changed. Daniel, Victor said, his voice smooth, controlled. You've been looking for me. Daniel stepped forward. I should have made sure you were dead the first time. Victor smirked. And yet, here I am. Evelyn, Malcolm, and Sophia emerged from the shadows, flanking Daniel. Their presence didn't faze Victor in the slightest. If anything, he seemed amused. I assume you've been keeping yourselves busy, Victor continued, tilting his head slightly. All this effort to stop a ghost. Daniel clenched his jaw. What do you want? Victor exhaled slowly. I don't want revenge, Daniel. I want my empire back. And I want to see which one of you is willing to bleed for it. Silence fell over them. Then gunfire. Chaos erupted. Shadows moved. People screamed. Malcolm hit the ground, clutching his shoulder. Evelyn ducked behind a pillar, firing back. Richard's voice crackled in Daniel's earpiece, but it was drowned out by the chaos. Daniel turned, searching for Victor, only to find him gone. A realization hit him like ice. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a distraction. When Daniel made it back to his penthouse, the truth was waiting for him. The doors were open, his security neutralized, his office ransacked, and on his desk a single note. Checkmate. A notification popped up on his phone. His accounts frozen. His power ripped away in a single calculated move. Victor hadn't come to kill them. He had come to destroy them. And he had won. Weeks later, whispers of Victor Harrington's return spread through the city. The board of his former company had been replaced. His wealth had resurfaced. And Daniel had vanished. Some say he fled. Others believe he was eliminated. But one thing was certain, Victor Harrington was back. And this time, no one would dare challenge him again.